As the Catholic Church faces mounting challenges, from dwindling numbers in Europe to increasing scrutiny over its doctrines and relevance in a modern, fractured world, this revelation seems like a deliberate move. But what exactly is being revealed? And why does Cardinal Tagle matter so much? Let's get into these intriguing details. At the heart of this revelation lies a story of faith, compassion, and an audacious vision for the future of the Church. Pope Francis has often been hailed as a reformer, a leader unafraid to challenge centuries-old norms to reconnect with the people, especially those on society's fringes. In Cardinal Tagle, the Pope seems to have found not just an ally, but someone whose life and work embody the values the Church is desperate to reclaim: humility, humanity, and a deep connection to the poor. To understand why this revelation is so significant, we need to explore the profound bond between these two figures. From the moment Pope Francis took office in 2013, he made it clear that the Church must be a poor church for the poor. Cardinal Tagle, who at that time was Archbishop of Manila, was already living this philosophy. His leadership in the Philippines, marked by his accessibility, empathy, and dedication to serving the marginalized, caught the Pope's attention. But this was no mere coincidence. Pope Francis had been closely watching Tagle's work, and what he saw was not just a local leader, but a potential global figure, someone capable of reshaping the Church's future. Tagle's approach was deeply rooted in his upbringing. Born in 1957 in Manila, he grew up in a modest home, surrounded by the vibrant yet often harsh realities of life in a developing country. His family wasn't wealthy, but they were rich in values, humility, generosity, and a profound sense of community. These early experiences shaped Tagle's character and his unwavering commitment to the poor. Even as a young seminarian, his peers noted his sharp intellect and ability to connect with people from all walks of life. These qualities would later define his leadership style. By the time he became Archbishop of Manila in 2011, Tagle was already known for his pastoral focus and reformist tendencies. He wasn't the kind of leader who sat in an ivory tower, dictating doctrine from a distance. Instead, he was often found in the streets, meeting with everyday people, listening to their struggles, and finding ways to bring the Church closer to their lives. This hands-on approach was perhaps most evident during one of the Philippines' darkest hours, Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. The typhoon, one of the strongest ever recorded, left a trail of destruction in its wake, displacing millions and claiming thousands of lives. Amid the chaos and despair, Cardinal Tagle became a beacon of hope. His response was swift and heartfelt. While governments and international organizations scrambled to provide aid, Tagle was already on the ground, comforting survivors, mobilizing resources, and rallying the Church to take a leading role in the recovery effort. It wasn't just his actions, but the way he carried them out, with compassion, humility, and an unshakable sense of duty, that left a lasting impression. It was during this time that Pope Francis's interest in Tagle seemed to deepen. Here was a man who not only preached the gospel, but lived it, often in the most challenging circumstances. Their paths crossed more directly when Tagle's work with Caritas Internationalis, a global Catholic charity, brought him to the Vatican's attention. As president of Caritas, Tagle spearheaded initiatives to fight hunger, poverty, and climate change, issues that resonated deeply with Pope Francis's own priorities. The two shared a vision of a church that wasn't confined to ornate cathedrals, but one that actively worked to heal a broken world. This shared vision became even clearer in 2019 when Pope Francis appointed Tagle as the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a position colloquially known as the Red Pope. This role placed Tagle at the helm of the Church's missionary efforts, granting him significant influence over its global agenda. But it was more than just a promotion. It was a signal. Pope Francis was entrusting Tagle with one of the Church's most critical missions, ensuring its relevance in the 21st century. Yet this revelation is about more than titles and promotions. It's about the future of the Church. Pope Francis's decision to highlight Tagle's role now seems calculated, a move to prepare the world for a potential shift in leadership. Could this be a subtle endorsement for Tagle as a possible successor? The speculation isn't unfounded. Tagle's trajectory within the Church, his alignment with Pope Francis's vision, and his increasing visibility on the global stage make him a compelling candidate. But with this revelation comes questions. What does it mean for the Catholic Church, which is already grappling with its identity in a rapidly changing world? Will Tagle's compassionate, reformist approach resonate with a global congregation that is increasingly divided between tradition and progress? Or will it deepen the ideological rifts within the Church? One thing is clear. Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle share not just a vision but a mission to bring the Church closer to its people, especially those who have long felt excluded. This revelation isn't just about Tagle's past or present. It's about the future of a 2,000-year-old institution at a critical crossroads. And as we delve deeper into Tagle's journey and his partnership with Pope Francis, the stakes for the Church and the world become ever more apparent. Cardinal Tagle's rise to prominence within the Catholic Church is as much a story of dedication and humility as it is one of leadership. To understand his significance today, it's essential to delve into his journey from Manila's streets to the corridors of Vatican power. For many, he represents a new face of the Church, one that is deeply connected to its people, particularly those at society's margins. This connection stems from the very foundation of his life. Born in 1957 in Manila, Luis Antonio Tagle was the eldest of 3 children in a modest, middle-class family. His parents instilled in him a deep sense of compassion and faith. Manila, with its vibrant culture and stark economic disparities, became the backdrop for his formative years. The young Tagle often witnessed the struggles of the poor, a reality that would profoundly shape his future calling. Those early experiences of observing families living with so little, yet finding joy in community and faith, became the seeds of his pastoral philosophy. Even as a child, Tagle displayed a sharp intellect and an unshakable sense of purpose. His teachers would describe him as a natural leader, not because he sought attention, but because he earned respect through kindness and understanding. These traits carried into his seminary years, where his deep connection with theology and a genuine ability to listen set him apart. His approach was always less about commanding authority and more about earning trust, something that would become a hallmark of his leadership. By the time he was appointed Archbishop of Manila in 2011, Tagle had already established a reputation for his humility and theological depth. Manila's archdiocese is one of the largest in the world, encompassing millions of Catholics. Leading such a vast and diverse congregation required not just administrative skills, but a profound ability to connect with people. Tagle did so with remarkable ease. Whether it was through his heartfelt homilies or his quiet presence among the poor, he made himself accessible, earning him the nickname Asia's Francis, even before Pope Francis's papacy began. One pivotal moment that cemented Tagle's reputation came in 2013, in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan. The storm, one of the most powerful ever recorded, devastated entire regions of the Philippines, leaving millions homeless and thousands dead. As the nation reeled, Tagle stepped forward not just as a religious leader, but as a figure of unity and hope. While global aid organizations mobilized resources, Tagle focused on healing. He traveled to affected areas, comforting survivors, conducting masses amidst the rubble, and listening, always listening, to the stories of loss and resilience. His actions during that crisis caught the attention of leaders beyond the Philippines, including Pope Francis. The two shared an understanding that leadership was not about commanding from a distance, but walking alongside those who suffer. It was no surprise that Tagle's influence began to extend far beyond his homeland. His work with Caritas Internationalis, the Church's global charity network, further elevated his global profile. Here, he championed causes like fighting hunger, addressing climate change, and promoting social justice, earning him respect as a humanitarian and reformist. But leadership on a global stage also comes with challenges. For all his charisma and compassion, Tagle faced criticism, particularly from more conservative factions within the Church. They viewed his approach as overly progressive, arguing that his focus on social issues risked diluting the Church's doctrinal authority. Yet, Tagle remained steadfast, asserting that compassion and doctrine were not mutually exclusive. His philosophy was simple: the Church cannot preach to empty pews. To remain relevant, it must engage with the world's pressing issues, from poverty and inequality to the growing environmental crisis. This progressive stance resonated deeply with Pope Francis, who had been making waves as a reformist since his election in 2013. The parallels between Francis and Tagle became increasingly apparent, with both advocating for a Church of the poor. Francis's vision of decentralizing the Vatican's power structures and focusing on inclusivity found a natural ally in Tagle. It wasn't just that they shared similar views, it was the way they embodied them that stood out. Both leaders were unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths, whether addressing the Church's historical missteps or calling out global injustices. In 2019, Pope Francis appointed Cardinal Tagle as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a position colloquially known as the Red Pope. The title is symbolic, reflecting the immense power and responsibility associated with the role. As head of the Church's missionary efforts, Tagle was tasked with spearheading its evangelization initiatives, particularly in regions like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where Catholicism continues to grow. It was a clear indication of Francis's trust in Tagle's ability to carry forward his vision of a church that serves the peripheries. However, such a prominent role also placed Tagle under greater scrutiny. Critics questioned whether his progressive ideals could withstand the complex realities of Vatican politics. Others wondered whether his rise signaled a broader shift within the Church, one that could alienate more traditionalist elements. Yet Tagle seemed unfazed by the speculation. He approached his new responsibilities with the same humility and resolve that had defined his career, focusing on fostering dialogue and building bridges. Tagle's work in this role has been pivotal in addressing some of the Church's most pressing challenges. In an era marked by cultural shifts and geopolitical tensions, his ability to navigate diverse perspectives has proven invaluable. He has advocated for interfaith dialogue, emphasizing the need for the Church to collaborate with other religions in promoting peace and understanding. His efforts to address climate change, particularly in vulnerable regions, have positioned him as a global moral leader, echoing Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. As his influence grows, so too does the speculation about his future within the Church. Could Cardinal Tagle be the leader the Catholic Church needs in an increasingly polarized world? His life and work suggest a leader who understands both the weight of tradition and the need for adaptation. But the road ahead is fraught with challenges, not least of which is navigating the ideological divides that continue to shape the Vatican's internal dynamics. Cardinal Tagle's work within the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples reflects not only his dedication to the Church, but also his determination to make it a global force for good. His focus has been on regions where the Church continues to grow: Asia, Africa, and Latin America, places that many now consider the future of Catholicism. While Europe and North America experience declining church attendance and waning influence, these regions remain vibrant hubs of faith and spirituality. However, this also means navigating cultural and social complexities that require a leader with both sensitivity and vision. Tagle has shown a remarkable ability to adapt to the diverse cultures he works with. His approach emphasizes listening and understanding before taking action, a philosophy that has won him widespread admiration. In many ways, his style mirrors Pope Francis's own methods, which have been described as pastoral rather than hierarchical. Tagle has often said that a church leader's role is not to command from above, but to walk alongside the people, guiding them with humility and compassion. This perspective has led him to advocate for what some describe as a church of the margins. He believes that the Church's relevance lies not in its ability to maintain its traditional structures, but in its capacity to meet people where they are, especially those who feel forgotten or excluded. It's a philosophy that resonates deeply with Pope Francis's teachings and has become a central theme in their partnership. But such a vision is not without its challenges. The Catholic Church is an institution steeped in tradition, and many within its hierarchy remain wary of change. Tagle's progressive stance has drawn criticism from conservative factions, who argue that his focus on issues like poverty, social justice, and climate change risks diverting attention from core theological doctrines. These critics see Tagle's approach as emblematic of a broader shift under Pope Francis's leadership, a shift that some view as a departure from the Church's historical identity. Yet for Tagle and Francis, this shift is not about abandoning tradition, but rather reinterpreting it in a way that speaks to the realities of today's world. They argue that the Church's mission has always been to serve, to uplift, and to provide hope. In an era marked by deep social divisions and global crises, this mission cannot be fulfilled through dogma alone. It requires action, compassion, and a willingness to engage with the world's most pressing challenges. Their shared vision has been tested time and again. One notable example is their response to the global refugee crisis. Both Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle have been outspoken advocates for the rights of refugees and migrants, emphasizing the Church's responsibility to protect the vulnerable. Tagle's work with Caritas Internationalis has placed him at the forefront of these efforts, coordinating humanitarian aid and calling for greater international cooperation. His ability to navigate these complex issues while maintaining a sense of moral clarity has further solidified his reputation as a global leader. However, this alignment with Pope Francis's vision has also made Tagle a polarizing figure within the Church. Some view him as a potential successor who could continue Francis's reformist agenda, while others see him as a symbol of the divisions that now define the Vatican's internal dynamics. These tensions have been most evident in the growing speculation about papal succession, a topic that inevitably sparks intense debate among clergy and laity alike. While Pope Francis has not indicated any immediate plans to step down, the question of who might succeed him looms large. Among the names frequently mentioned, Cardinal Tagle stands out, not just for his alignment with Francis, but for his unique background and leadership style. His ability to connect with people, his emphasis on dialogue, and his commitment to social justice make him a compelling candidate. But the very qualities that endear him to reformists also make him a target for traditionalists. The divide between these two camps, reformists and traditionalists, has become one of the defining features of the modern Church. Reformists, inspired by leaders like Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle, advocate for a more inclusive and outward-facing Church. They emphasize compassion, humility, and action, arguing that these values are essential for the Church to remain relevant in an increasingly secular world. Traditionalists, on the other hand, argue that such changes risk diluting the Church's identity and weakening its authority. They believe that the Church's strength lies in its ability to uphold timeless truths, even in the face of societal change. Cardinal Tagle finds himself at the center of this ideological tug-of-war. His rise within the Vatican has been met with both praise and skepticism. Supporters see him as a breath of fresh air, someone who represents the diversity and dynamism of the global Church. Critics, however, question whether his progressive approach can truly address the complex challenges facing Catholicism today. One of the most contentious issues is the Church's stance on social justice. For Tagle, addressing issues like poverty and inequality is not just a moral obligation but a theological imperative. He argues that the gospel message is one of liberation and hope, and that the Church must actively work to bring about these values in the world. This perspective has led him to champion causes like climate action, interfaith dialogue, and the rights of marginalized communities. Yet these efforts have also drawn accusations of politicization, with some claiming that Tagle's focus on social issues distracts from the Church's spiritual mission. Despite these criticisms, Tagle remains steadfast in his belief that the Church's role is to serve humanity in all its forms. His efforts to bridge divides, both within the Church and in the broader world, speak to his vision of a united, compassionate, and inclusive Catholicism. It's a vision that aligns closely with Pope Francis's own priorities, creating a partnership that has reshaped the Church's global mission. As their partnership continues to unfold, it raises important questions about the future of the Catholic Church. Will the next generation of leaders carry forward the reformist agenda championed by Francis and Tagle, or will the pendulum swing back toward tradition? And in a world that is increasingly polarized, can the Church find a way to reconcile its internal divisions while remaining a force for unity and hope? These questions are not just theoretical, they are deeply practical, touching on the very essence of what the Church stands for. And as Cardinal Tagle's influence continues to grow, the answers may well determine the direction of Catholicism for decades to come. As Cardinal Tagle's influence within the Church continues to grow, so too does the speculation about his role in shaping its future. While his reformist ideals align closely with Pope Francis's vision, his rise has inevitably sparked tension among those who see the Church's strength in preserving tradition rather than embracing change. This friction is most evident in the power dynamics within the Vatican, where reformists and traditionalists vie for influence in an institution that has weathered centuries of upheaval. For Pope Francis, the Church's future depends on its ability to adapt to an ever-changing world. His decision to elevate Cardinal Tagle to high-ranking positions, such as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, was a clear statement of intent. It signaled a shift toward a church that prioritizes compassion, inclusivity, and direct engagement with the world's most pressing issues. But this direction has not been universally welcomed. The conservative faction within the Church has been vocal in its opposition to many of Pope Francis's initiatives, viewing them as a departure from traditional Catholic values. They argue that leaders like Cardinal Tagle, while charismatic and well-intentioned, risk undermining the Church's doctrinal authority by focusing too heavily on social issues. For them, the Church's role is not to conform to the world, but to stand as a beacon of unchanging truth. These ideological differences came into sharp focus in the aftermath of several key decisions made by Pope Francis during his papacy. From addressing climate change in his encyclical Laudato Si to his calls for financial transparency within the Vatican, Francis has consistently pushed for reform. Cardinal Tagle's role in supporting these initiatives has only further solidified his position as a reformist leader, but it has also drawn him into the center of an increasingly polarized debate. One of the most contentious areas of this debate is the question of papal succession. With Pope Francis now in his late 80s, discussions about his potential successor have gained momentum. Cardinal Tagle's name is frequently mentioned in these conversations, but so too is that of Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State. The contrast between these two figures encapsulates the broader divide within the Church. Cardinal Parolin represents a more traditional approach to leadership. As the Vatican's top diplomat, he has extensive experience navigating the complex geopolitics of the Church. His focus has often been on maintaining stability and continuity, values that appeal to those who see the Church's strength in its ability to uphold centuries of tradition. Unlike Tagle, Parolin's leadership style is less overtly pastoral and more administrative, reflecting the intricate demands of Vatican politics. The potential rivalry between Tagle and Parolin is not just about individual personalities. It reflects two competing visions for the Church. On one hand, Tagle's reformist approach emphasizes outreach, inclusivity, and addressing global crises. On the other, Parolin's traditionalist perspective prioritizes doctrinal integrity and institutional stability. These differing approaches raise important questions about the Church's priorities in the decades to come. For many reformists, Tagle represents hope. His ability to connect with people on a deeply personal level, combined with his focus on social justice, makes him a compelling figure for those who believe the Church must evolve to remain relevant. His efforts to engage with marginalized communities, promote interfaith dialogue, and advocate for climate action have positioned him as a leader who embodies the values of compassion and humility. But such a vision is not without its risks. The Church's history is filled with moments of reform that have been met with resistance, and this era is no different. Critics argue that a focus on modernization and inclusivity, while noble, could dilute the Church's core teachings. They warn that in attempting to appeal to a broader audience, the Church risks losing its identity. For them, figures like Parolin provide a sense of reassurance, a reminder that tradition can coexist with progress, but only if change is measured and deliberate. Tagle, however, does not see tradition and progress as opposing forces. In his view, the Church's mission has always been one of service, and that mission must evolve to meet the needs of its time. He frequently cites the teachings of Jesus, who sought to uplift the downtrodden and challenge the status quo. For Tagle, remaining faithful to these teachings means addressing the challenges of today's world, whether they be poverty, inequality, or environmental degradation. This tension between reform and tradition is not confined to the Vatican. It extends to the global Catholic community. In regions like Asia and Africa, where the Church continues to grow, there is often a greater openness to progressive ideas. These regions, which form the Church's new demographic stronghold, are increasingly seen as critical to its future. His Asian heritage and his deep understanding of these cultures make him uniquely suited to lead in this context. His ability to navigate cultural differences and foster dialogue has earned him widespread respect, but it has also highlighted the challenges of leading a global church. As the church becomes more diverse, so too do the expectations placed on its leaders. Balancing the needs of a growing, heterogeneous congregation with the demands of a deeply rooted institution is no small task. For Tagle, this means finding ways to bridge divides, both within the church and in the broader world. It means addressing the concerns of traditionalists without alienating reformists, and promoting dialogue without compromising on core values. The challenges ahead are immense, but they are not insurmountable. Tagle's leadership style, characterized by humility, compassion, and a deep sense of purpose, offers a glimpse of what the church could look like under his guidance. Yet, the question of whether he will have the opportunity to lead remains uncertain. The path to the papacy is never straightforward, and the dynamics of Vatican politics are as complex as they are unpredictable. What is clear, however, is that Tagle's influence is growing. His work with Caritas Internationalis, his role as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, and his close partnership with Pope Francis have positioned him as a key figure in shaping the Church's future. Whether or not he becomes the next pope, his vision for a church that prioritizes service, compassion, and inclusivity is already leaving its mark. As we look to the future, the questions facing the Catholic Church are as profound as they are pressing. Can the Church reconcile its internal divisions while remaining a force for unity in an increasingly polarized world? Will it continue on the path of reform, or will it return to a more traditionalist approach? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of leader does the Church need to navigate these challenges? These questions may not have immediate answers, but they underscore the significance of leaders like Cardinal Tagle and the role they play in shaping the Church's destiny. As the Church stands at a crossroads, the role of leaders like Cardinal Tagle becomes increasingly pivotal. His ability to embody both the spirit of reform and the essence of tradition places him in a unique position, but it also underscores the complexities of leading a global institution in the modern era. The Church is no longer confined to the traditional strongholds of Europe and North America. Its future lies in the dynamic and growing regions of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where faith remains vibrant and intertwined with the everyday struggles of life. For Cardinal Tagle, this demographic shift is not just a statistical reality, but a spiritual calling. His experiences in the Philippines have shaped his understanding of faith as something deeply rooted in the lives of ordinary people. Whether it's addressing the needs of a rural farming community or engaging with urban slums, Tagle's approach has always been grounded in meeting people where they are. This philosophy extends to his work on the global stage, where he has consistently advocated for a church that listens, learns, and adapts. One of the defining aspects of Tagle's leadership is his emphasis on dialogue. In an increasingly fragmented world, he sees conversation as a bridge between divisions, be they cultural, ideological, or religious. His efforts in promoting interfaith understanding have been particularly noteworthy, reflecting a belief that the Church must play a role in fostering peace and unity. From engaging with Islamic leaders in Asia to participating in global forums on religious tolerance, Tagle has demonstrated a willingness to confront difficult conversations with humility and grace. Yet, this commitment to dialogue is not without its critics. Some within the Church argue that such an approach risks diluting Catholic doctrine, particularly when it involves collaboration with other faiths. They view Tagle's focus on inclusivity as a departure from the Church's historical role as a defender of absolute truth. These concerns are emblematic of the broader tensions within the Church, where the push for reform often clashes with the pull of tradition. This tension was perhaps most evident during Pope Francis's recent efforts to restructure the Church's global charity arm, Caritas Internationalis. As its president, Cardinal Tagle played a significant role in guiding the organization through a period of transformation. The decision to overhaul its leadership sparked controversy, with some viewing it as a necessary step toward greater accountability, and others seeing it as a disruption of established norms. Tagle's handling of the situation reflected his characteristic balance, firm in his convictions but always seeking consensus. The restructuring of Caritas highlights a broader theme in Tagle's leadership: his ability to navigate complex, often contentious issues without losing sight of the Church's mission. Whether it's addressing financial transparency within the Vatican or advocating for climate action on the global stage, he approaches each challenge with a sense of purpose and a focus on solutions. This pragmatism, coupled with his deep spirituality, has made him a figure of hope for many Catholics who long for a church that is both principled and practical. As speculation about the papal succession continues, Tagle's name remains at the forefront of discussions. His rise within the Vatican, his alignment with Pope Francis's vision, and his growing influence on the global stage all point to a leader who could shape the Church's future in profound ways. But the question of whether he will succeed Francis is far from simple. The process of selecting a new pope is shrouded in secrecy, and the dynamics of the conclave often defy prediction. What's more, the Church's internal divisions add an additional layer of complexity to an already intricate decision-making process. Even if Cardinal Tagle does not ascend to the papacy, his legacy is already being written. His work has left an indelible mark on the Church, from his leadership during crises in the Philippines to his advocacy for social justice on the global stage. His emphasis on humility, compassion, and action has resonated with millions, offering a vision of Catholicism that is both deeply rooted in tradition and open to the possibilities of change. As the Church looks to the future, the questions it faces are not just about leadership but about identity. Can the Church continue to evolve while remaining true to its core teachings? How can it address the needs of a diverse and often divided global congregation? And perhaps most critically, what role should it play in a world that is increasingly skeptical of institutional authority? Cardinal Tagle's life and work offer some answers to these questions. His focus on the margins, on the poor, the marginalized, and the excluded represents a return to the Church's foundational mission. His ability to engage with modern challenges, from climate change to interfaith dialogue, shows a willingness to adapt without compromising on principle. And his unwavering commitment to listening, learning, and serving offers a model of leadership that is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. The future of the Church will not be determined by one person alone, but by the collective actions of its leaders and followers. Leaders like Cardinal Tagle are shaping that future, offering a vision of hope in a time of uncertainty. Whether he becomes the next pope or continues his work in other capacities, his influence is undeniable. He has shown that faith is not just about tradition, but about transformation, that the Church's greatest strength lies not in its buildings or doctrines, but in its ability to touch lives and inspire change. Love, mercy, and humility are the foundations of our shared humanity. What truly makes Pope Francis beloved across the globe is his remarkable ability to connect with ordinary people. Whether he's chatting with crowds in St. Peter's Square, engaging in meaningful dialogue, or writing heartfelt letters to people in need, he brings a personal touch to his role. His interactions are never about elevating his own status or creating a divide between himself and the people. Instead, he makes it clear that being a true leader isn't about wielding power. It's about serving others with genuine care and compassion. He leads not by dictating, but by example, showing the world that true leadership involves humility, empathy, and a commitment to justice. So, why do so many people around the world love Pope Francis? It boils down to one fundamental truth. He reminds us of the goodness in humanity. Whether through his words or actions, Pope Francis teaches us that kindness, charity, and humanity aren't just nice ideas. They are responsibilities we all share. Since becoming Pope in 2013, he's made charity a cornerstone of his papacy. For him, charity isn't just about occasional acts of generosity. It's a way of life, a continual call to action that embodies the essence of faith. He constantly reminds us that faith without action is empty, and he leads by example, always putting compassion into practice, whether it's through his charitable efforts or his outreach to the most vulnerable in society. One of Pope Francis's most powerful statements speaks to the idea that a Christian faith which doesn't challenge the powerful or inspire a deep commitment to charity risks becoming nothing more than a harmless form of devotion. In other words, he insists that faith must lead to real, tangible change in the world, and that challenge often means standing up to injustice and inequality. Pope Francis's humanitarian work, both in thought and action, reflects this belief. His efforts after the devastating earthquakes shook Turkey and Syria are a testament to this commitment. The Pope didn't simply offer prayers. He sent real help. Aid supplies, financial support, and the coordinated efforts of organizations like the Rava Foundation were dispatched to refugee camps in desperate need of assistance. Whether it's food, medicine, or shelter, Pope Francis believes in charity that is practical, immediate, and impactful. Charity that reaches those who need it most in their time of crisis. This is the kind of leadership Pope Francis has embodied throughout his papacy, one that calls on the global community to act, to serve, and to uplift the most vulnerable among us. His dedication to Ukraine is another powerful example. Long before the recent conflict, Pope Francis was deeply concerned about the suffering there. In 2016, he personally donated $6 million to provide not just food and clothing, but also medical care and therapy. For him, charity isn't just about meeting immediate needs. It's about helping people heal, rebuild, and regain their dignity. But Pope Francis doesn't just leave this work to big organizations. He actively supports and uplifts smaller groups that share his vision. He praises organizations like Cardinal International, which operates in over 200 countries, and the University College for Aspiring Missionary Doctors, which sends doctors to underserved hospitals in Africa. These groups may not always make the headlines, but their work changes lives, and Pope Francis makes sure they know how valuable they are. Even in his own home continent of South America, Francis has inspired countless initiatives to combat poverty, homelessness, and inequality. During the World Day of the Poor, he reminded the Church that serving the poor isn't optional. In a powerful homily, Pope Francis emphasized that the Church truly embodies the teachings of Jesus when it serves the poor. This really sums up Pope Francis, a man who believes that helping the most vulnerable is the heart of Christianity. One of his most innovative charity projects focuses on children, whom he calls the seeds of the future. His global network for children aims to create centers of medical excellence to provide care for young people in underserved areas. It's a beautiful reminder that while some illnesses may be incurable, no child should ever be seen as incurable in the eyes of love. What truly sets Pope Francis apart is his ability to pair grand ideas with small personal touches. He shares meals with the poor, embraces the sick, and encourages others to do the same. During one World Day of the Poor, he personally shared lunch with 300 struggling people. It's such a simple act, yet so profound. Pope Francis reminds us that even the smallest acts of love can change the world. And in a time when the world feels divided and uncertain, that's exactly the kind of leader we need. His journey of peace and compassion has taken him far and wide, and it's clear that he's never one to stay quietly behind the Vatican walls. Since becoming Pope in 2013, he's been on the move, visiting countries across the globe to spread messages of hope, peace, and interfaith dialogue. His travels are never about ceremony or show. They're heartfelt and always focused on bringing people together during some of the most challenging times in our modern world. 2024 has been a particularly busy year for Pope Francis, perhaps the busiest of his papacy, and his international visits have gained even more significance. Let's take a step back and remember how it all started. One of Pope Francis's first iconic trips was to Brazil in 2013 for World Youth Day. Imagine this. 3.5 million pilgrims gathered on Copacabana Beach, listening to the new Pope call them to live full, meaningful lives. He urged young people not to be part-time Christians, sparking a fire of faith that spread far beyond the shores of Rio de Janeiro. That trip set the tone for his global mission. A Pope who wouldn't hide behind tradition but would travel the world to stand with people wherever they were. From there, Pope Francis's passport quickly filled up. He visited conflict zones, historical regions, and the forgotten corners of the world, always delivering a message of unity and healing. In 2014, his powerful visit to the Holy Land had him praying at the West Bank barrier and meeting with religious leaders, including Patriarch Bartholomew. It wasn't just a religious tour, it was a deliberate call for dialogue and peace in a region long torn by conflict. That same year, he headed to South Korea, where he beatified 124 Korean martyrs in front of 800,000 people, showing his ability to bring people together in faith, no matter how divided the region might be. Pope Francis's global influence hasn't been limited to the Christian world. Time and again, he's shown his willingness to bridge the gaps between different faiths. Whether addressing the European Parliament in 2014 or celebrating one of the largest papal masses in history in the Philippines in 2015, with a staggering 7 million attendees, his travels have always blended spiritual leadership with global diplomacy. Fast forward to 2024, and it's like Pope Francis has kicked things into overdrive. This year alone, he's embarked on a whirlwind of international visits, each one carefully planned to address some of the most pressing global issues: religious harmony, social justice, and peace. His agenda has been relentless, but his message has remained just as clear. The highlight of the year was undoubtedly his ambitious Southeast Asia and Oceania tour in September. His first stop? Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim-majority country. There, in an extraordinary moment of interfaith cooperation, Pope Francis and Grand Imam Nasiruddin Umar signed the Joint Declaration of Istanbul 2024, a document focused on promoting religious harmony and addressing humanitarian and environmental crises. Pope Francis's message is simple yet profound. Different faiths can and must work together to heal the world. His travels in 2024 have highlighted this idea in the most powerful ways. After Indonesia, where he helped foster interfaith cooperation and signed a crucial declaration on religious harmony, Francis continued his journey with a mission to spread peace. In Papua New Guinea, his message wasn't just about peace, it was about ending tribal violence that had long affected local communities. His visit brought humanitarian aid and, more importantly, hope to a region in dire need of both. Next, he made his way to East Timor, a country where Catholicism runs deep, and celebrated Mass for an astonishing 600,000 people, nearly half of the country's entire population. This event was a moment of healing, reconciliation, and encouragement for a nation still recovering from its troubled past. In Singapore, Francis spoke to the younger generation, urging them to embrace interfaith dialogue as a key tool in building a more peaceful future. But Pope Francis wasn't done yet. Later in the year, he visited Luxembourg, a small yet powerful nation known for its focus on economic justice. There, he called on wealthy nations to take more responsibility in helping the world's poorest. And in December, he made history by being the first pope ever to visit Corsica. His message there was about finding balance between secular and religious values, promoting a model of dynamic secularity where faith and civic life work together in harmony. So why are these visits so important? Because Pope Francis knows that change doesn't happen with words alone. By physically traveling to places like war-torn villages, busy city squares, or struggling slums, he shows up in solidarity with the people. He reminds world leaders of their responsibilities and encourages everyday citizens to take action. His presence shines a spotlight on the forgotten, the overlooked, and the marginalized, making sure their voices are heard. But not all of Pope Francis's visits went exactly as planned. Take his trip to Paris, for instance. It was meant to be a major, eagerly anticipated event, both for the Vatican and the French public. But just as everything seemed to fall into place, chaos erupted. We'll get into that later, though. Beyond these significant journeys, Pope Francis has become a central figure at some of the most important church openings and dedications around the world. Whether it's inaugurating a newly restored basilica, blessing a humble chapel in a far-flung village, or showing solidarity at churches rebuilt after war or disaster, his presence always carries profound meaning. He doesn't just show up, he leaves a lasting impression. Take the restoration of the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, for example. When this iconic church underwent major renovations, it was only fitting that Pope Francis led the Jubilee celebrations. His presence was a reminder that the beauty of faith often comes through the preservation and renewal of the church itself. Pope Francis's absence from the grand reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is a moment that has sparked much speculation and intrigue. Given his usual presence at key religious milestones, the decision to skip such a historic event, especially one like Notre Dame, a symbol of faith and resilience for millions, raises several important questions. Pope Francis has long emphasized that the strength of the Church lies not in grand buildings, but in its people and their faith. His words about telling everything suggest that his absence was not about disregard, but rather about reaffirming his message of humility and service. The Pope has consistently focused on the marginalized, the poor, and those who often feel forgotten, so it's possible that he chose to be elsewhere to serve these communities or address other urgent needs in a world that is still reeling from crises and inequalities. In his usual style, Pope Francis often subverts expectations to make a point, showing that faith is not bound by tradition or ceremony. The Church's true strength, as he might see it, is in how it uplifts and supports the people. Notre Dame's reopening may have been a significant moment, but perhaps he felt that the real message of faith, renewal, rebuilding, and hope, could be better represented through the people who embody those values every day, rather than through the symbolic restoration of a building. The French public's reaction of confusion and disappointment is understandable, as many likely saw Pope Francis's presence at Notre Dame as a spiritual affirmation of the Church's resilience and renewal. However, in typical Pope Francis fashion, his absence speaks volumes about his values, prioritizing people over monuments, the forgotten over the celebrated, and the service of others over grand ceremonies. Whatever the deeper reason behind his decision, it's clear that Pope Francis's actions often have a purpose beyond the surface, and his absence at Notre Dame may well be a part of a larger message he seeks to convey about the nature of faith, humility, and the Church's true role in the world.